I regard this as quite an exciting bit of work, really. It's strange how it began with a casual picking up of a rock on the beach.
Welcome to Polar Podcasts, where you'll hear stories from geologists who've spent their careers, their lives, exploring and studying the remarkable and remote geology of Greenland. Why did they become fascinated with Greenland? What were the problems and the discoveries that drove them? And what was it like working in these remote places where few people venture, even now? I'm Julie Hollis. In this episode, we hear more from Kent Brooks, Emeritus Professor at the Geological Museum in Copenhagen, about the chance discovery of an unusual rock he picked up in East Greenland that led to years of productive research about the nature of the Earth's mantle far beneath the Earth's surface.
Well, one of the projects we had, which I was quite proud of, it was something that started years ago when I was with Nordic Mining Company, Nordisk Mineselskabet, in 1970. We were flying at that time. We were flying up the coast from Kangerlussuaq to look at the various intrusions along the Blossville coast. Most prominent is the Lilwas intrusion. And in order to do that, we had to lay out fuel depots. But we're just about to go out on this trip when we got a radio message that there'd been an accident at Wiedemannsfjord. That's by the Lilwas intrusion. There'd been an accident, and we needed to have a medivac. And so our helicopter flew up there, and a chap called Peter Brown, who I've mentioned before, he was my neighbour as a youth. Surprisingly enough, he'd been crossing the Kronborg Glacier, the same glacier that we were unable to cross on foot, and he'd fallen, and his rucksack had swung around somehow and put his arm out of joint, and they couldn't put it back in again. It dislocated. They couldn't repair it. But we had a doctor with us, so we could fly him out, and the doctor would put it back. He actually did it. He was an Austrian doctor. And he laid Peter on his back and put a boot under his armpit, and then got hold of his hand and gave it a mighty jerk. And there was a sort of cracking noise, and Peter screamed in agony, but then found that his arm was back in joint again. Anyhow, we medevaced him out of Lilwas and off Wiedemannsfjord, and while the helicopter was stopped there, I just happened to notice by the skin of the helicopter an interesting looking bit of rock, and so I just picked this thing up, shoved it in the chopper, and later on I had a thin section, had a look at it.
A thin section of a rock allows geologists to identify minerals under a microscope.
And it turned out to be quite unusual, and I rapidly identified fragments of mantle material in it. That is, I found small crystals of chromite, or chrome spinel rather, enstatite, orthopyroxene, and olivines, and then small aggregates of enstatite, olivine, and chrome spinel.
These are minerals that are rare in the crust, but which make up much of the Earth's mantle.
And these were analysed on the microprobe, and we published a little paper in Contributions to Mineralogy and Petrology. Well, Peter Kellerman, who was at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, was aware of this paper, and when we were having the expedition in 1995 under the auspices of Danish Lithosphere Centre.
The Danish Lithosphere Centre was a geological research centre based in Copenhagen in the 1990s to early 2000s.
He got his eye on this and said we'd go back and look for more of this material. And so I said, that's fine. Peter Kellerman, I should say, is an outstanding geochemist and petrologist. He now has a distinguished chair in Columbia University at the Lamont Oceanographic Observatory. At that time it was the Woods Hole Oceanographic Observatory in Cape Cod. Anyhow, I was not at all clear whether we could find any more of this stuff, because of course I didn't know. I just picked up the one rock. It might just have been one rock that was there, but I wouldn't be able to find the rest of it. when we flew up there, and as far as I could remember, I mean, what had gone past 80, 90, more than 20 years had passed, and I couldn't quite remember where we landed, but we landed where I thought we'd been, and we got out. Oh, and lo and behold, we did. We found quite a lot more. We spent some days there, and we loaded up quite a few boxes of rocks with this stuff. And this was another payload problem, because the helicopter was loaded so heavily with these rocks that it could scarcely get off the ground. With helicopters, they have a torque monitor, and if this goes over much over 100%, you have a matter of seconds before the engine burns out. So you mustn't sort of put far too much torque on the motor like that. In this case, we just managed to get airborne. And of course, once you get airborne, it's all right, because the weight is decreasing all the time when you burn the fuel. It's just a question of getting off the ground. If you can't get off the ground, that's that's the end of it. You have to take something out. Anyhow, we collected a whole lot of stuff here, and Stefan worked on this mainly.
Stefan Bernstein, a former PhD student of Kent's, and now head of the Department of Petrology and Economic Geology at the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland.
And it turned out that the rocks were, these nodules of mantle rocks, they were extremely depleted. That is to say that the easily fusible elements,
those that can be melted easily,
that when a rock undergoes partial melting, some elements melt out before the others, and you're left with an infusible residue. These were rocks which had an enormous amount of material melted out of them, and there was only this infertile residue left over. And that is, you can see that because of the composition of the olivine, which is very magnesium rich. Anyhow, Stefan found out that these rocks could be the residual material from the melting of a type of rock called chromatiite. Chromatiites are only found in the Precambrian.
The geological time period from the earliest history of the Earth until about 540 million years ago.
They're very magnesium-rich lavas, much more magnesium-rich than the normal basalts, and they're not known from younger rocks in the Precambrian. And the reason for this is thought to be that during the early stages of Earth's history, the geothermal gradient was much higher than it is today. That is, the Earth was much hotter, and so things melted at higher temperatures. The volcanic rocks were produced at higher temperatures. Anyhow, it appeared that these minerals and nodules in the rocks of Wiedemannsfjord, they were residues from the melting of rocks in the early Precambrian. Of course, we didn't really know the age of it. We didn't have any grasp of the age of it. But later on, we were able to show that, in fact, these things did date from the Precambrian by using the so-called rhenium-osmium model ages, and that was work that Karen Hanghoy did.
Karen Hanghoy is a former PhD student of Kent's and is now director of the British Geological Survey, the first woman to hold the role in the survey's 185-year history.
When she spent her time at Woods Hole, she determined the rhenium and osmium isotopic constants of the rocks, and was able to make a guess as to what kind of time, what the time was when the melting had taken place. I regard this as quite an exciting bit of work, really, and it's strange how it began with a casual picking up of a rock on the beach. We extended the work subsequently by going to West Greenland, and Stefan and I spent a summer on Ubekent Island and collected similar rocks from West Greenland. Most notably, something in a rock on the west coast of Ubekent Island that we called Dead Dog's Gulch because there was a dead dog in it, but which was rather uncomfortable because the best exposure we found there was only like a few yards from the carcass of this smelly dog. And quite why the dog had chosen to die, I had no idea, but it was it was very inconvenient. It happened to be there. It could have trodden on the whole coastline. Anyhow, this dike was absolutely packed full of nodules. It was spectacular, very spectacular rock was the Dead Dog Dyke.
The nodules Kent's referring to are pieces of the Earth's mantle, which are rarely found at the Earth's surface.
And it yielded very similar results to those we got from Wiedemannsfjord. And I think in all we got 4 or 5 papers out of this project.
I'm Julie Hollis, and you've been listening to Polar Podcasts. In the next episode, we hear more from Emeritus Senior Scientist Bjørn Thomassen about severe storms while exploring for gold in northwest Greenland. Karen Hanghoy is a former PhD student of Kent's and is now director of the British Geological Survey, the first woman to hold the role in the survey's 185-year history.